Chapter 1. The Hound in the Rain. Rain came down in sheets, turning the cobblestones into black mirrors that reflected nothing but darkness. Elena pressed herself against the alley wall, her sodden coat clinging to her frame like a second skin. 3 days without proper shelter had left her hollow-eyed and shaking. But it was the footsteps behind her measured, deliberate that made her blood run cold. She'd taken the shortcut through the merchant district because the main streets belonged to them after dark. Everyone knew that. Everyone except the desperate and the foolish, and Elena had become both. The footsteps stopped. She didn't turn around. Her fingers found the rough brick at her back, nails scraping mortar as if she could claw her way through the wall itself. The silence stretched, broken only by rain drumming against stone, and the distant toll of midnight bells from the Cathedral of Saints. Lost, are we? The voice was cultured, amused. Male. Elena's throat closed. She'd heard stories about the ones who spoke before they struck the old ones, who remembered when humans were prey and conversation was part of the hunt. She forced herself to turn slowly, keeping her hands visible. 3 of them blocked the alley mouth. 2 men in dark coats that cost more than she'd earned in a year, and a woman whose pale hair seemed to glow even in the darkness. Their eyes caught the lamplight, wrong to bright, to steady. Predator eyes. I'm just passing through, Elena managed. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected, shaped by the rhetoric training she'd once received in a life that felt like someone else's dream. I mean no intrusion upon your territory. The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. It speaks the old courtesies. How charming. She tilted her head, studying Elena with the focused intensity of a cat watching a mouse. You're educated. That's rare for street vermin. Heat flared through Elena's chest, anger cutting through fear. 3 months ago, she'd stood in lecture halls. She'd worn silk and debated philosophy over wine. Then her father's scandal broke, her engagement shattered. And polite society had turned its back with practiced efficiency. I was someone once, she said quietly, and now you're nothing. The woman stepped forward, her movements liquid and wrong. Perfect. House Corvus needs servants who understand their place. And you smell. She inhaled deeply. Desperate enough not to run, Elena's pulse hammered. She'd heard of House Corvus, everyone had. One of the 5 great houses that ruled the city's night, ancient and cruel and utterly without mercy. Servants who entered their manor rarely left. And if they did, they left changed. I'll decline, Elena said, though her voice shook now. That wasn't an offer. The woman's smile revealed teeth that were just slightly too sharp. Seize her. The 2 men moved with inhuman speed. Elena stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. No escape from the blind alley she'd foolishly chosen. Her shoulder blades hit brick. Cold fingers closed on her wrist. Then the growl came. It wasn't a sound that belonged in a city. It was something primal, dragged up from forests and wild places, from an age when humans huddled around fires and feared the dark. The grip on Elena's wrist vanished. She looked up to see her attackers frozen, their confidence cracking into something that looked almost like fear. At the alley's entrance, backlit by gaslight and rain, stood a creature that made Elena's rational mind stutter and fail. It was shaped like a hound, but far too large, easily the size of a small horse. Its fur was black as pitch, and its eyes burned with the same wrong-colored light she'd seen in the vampire's gazes, but fiercer, ancient. When it moved forward, each step was utterly silent, despite its size. No, the Corvus woman breathed. That's not possible. Silvermark's hound doesn't leave the old quarter. It doesn't hunt for. The creature's lips pulled back, revealing fangs that gleamed like polished ivory. The growl deepened, resonating in Elena's chest like the lowest note of an organ. The vampires ran. They didn't pretend dignity or power. They simply fled, moving with that terrible speed, coats whipping behind them as they vanished into the rain-soaked night. The bells tolled again. 1, 2, 3 chimes marking the quarter hour. Elena stood frozen, her back against wet brick, staring at the creature that had just saved her. Or perhaps had merely claimed her for itself. The hound regarded her with those burning eyes. This close, she could see that its form seemed to shift at the edges, as if it existed slightly out of phase with reality. Smoke curled from its breath, turning to mist in the cold air. Everyone in the city knew about Silvermark's hound, the monster that guarded the vampire lord's territory with savage efficiency. The thing that killed without mercy, without hesitation. Children were warned about it. Adults crossed themselves and took different streets, but Elena was too tired to run, too hollow, too far past caring. She slid down the wall until she sat on the wet cobblestones, her coat pooling around her. The hound watched, motionless. Rain ran down its dark fur in silver rivulets. "Thank you," Elena whispered. She didn't know why she said it. Exhaustion, perhaps, or the strange calm that came from accepting death. But the words felt right, felt true, even spoken to a monster. The hound's ears pricked forward. It took one step closer, then another, until its massive head was level with hers. This close, she could feel the heat radiating from its body, could smell rain and smoke and something wild, like ancient forests. Slowly, carefully, Elena lifted one trembling hand. The hound went absolutely still. "Good boy," she breathed, and touched her fingers to its muzzle. The world went white. Chapter 2. The Manor of Smoke and Silence. Awoke to silk. The sensation registered before consciousness fully returned. Smooth fabric against her cheek, soft beyond anything she'd touched in months. Her eyes opened to candlelight dancing across a ceiling painted with constellations that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. This wasn't the alley. This wasn't the charity shelter or the boarding house that had turned her away. This was somewhere else entirely, and the memory of burning eyes and white light crashed over her like a wave. She sat up too quickly. The room tilted, and a hand caught her shoulder, firm but careful, steadying her without forcing her back down. Slowly, said a voice like aged whiskey and winter nights. "You've been unconscious for 6 hours. Your body needs time to adjust." Elena turned her head and forgot how to breathe. The man sitting beside her bed was beautiful in the way that dangerous things were beautiful. A blade's edge, a cliff face, a storm gathering on the horizon. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, framing a face of sharp angles and elegant planes. His eyes were the color of smoke, gray and shifting, and they held the same ancient weight she'd seen in the hound's burning gaze. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with scars that looked like they'd been made by claws. Old scars, long healed, but the silver white lines caught the candlelight. "Where am I?" Elena's voice came out rough. Her throat felt raw, as if she'd been screaming. "Silvermark Manor. My home." He withdrew his hand, giving her space. "You touched my hound. That's not something mortals typically survive." The words were matter of fact, but Elena heard the question underneath them. She wrapped the silk sheets around herself. She was still wearing her wet clothes, she realized, though someone had removed her ruined boots and tried to organize her scattered thoughts. "I didn't know it would. She trailed off. "How did you explain instinct?" The bone-deep certainty that the creature wouldn't hurt her, that saying thank you was the right thing to do. "You spoke a kindness to something everyone else fears, the vampire, because he was obviously one, even if he looked nothing like the Corvus attackers." Tilted his head slightly. "And it recognized you. That's never happened before." "Recognized me?" Elena's fingers tightened on the sheets. "I've never been to the old quarter. I've never seen your hound until tonight. Not you specifically." He rose from the chair, moving to the window with that liquid grace they all seemed to possess. Rain still battered the glass, though the storm had lessened. "It recognized something in you. Grief, perhaps. Loneliness. The hound was created from such things centuries ago. It knows its own." The words hit harder than Elena expected. She looked away, focusing on the room instead. The dark wood paneling, the shelves lined with leather-bound books, the fireplace where flames burned without consuming the logs beneath them. Everything spoke of age and wealth and careful curation. "Why didn't it kill me?" she asked finally. "Because I told it not to." Elena's gaze snapped back to him. He stood silhouetted against the window, rain light painting silver edges around his form. "You were there," she said slowly. "In the alley. I'm always there. The hound is an extension of my will." He turned to face her fully. "I felt the Corvus hunters enter my territory. I sent the hound to discourage them. I didn't expect to find you. So you brought me here." Elena's mind raced, trying to understand. "What happens now? Am I a prisoner?" "You're a complication." But his tone held something almost like amusement. "House Corvus will know you survived. They'll know you're under my protection now, whether either of us wants that or not." Touching the hound created a bond, a temporary one, but visible to anyone who knows how to look. "I don't understand any of this." Frustration bled into Elena's voice. "I don't understand your world, your rules, then I'll teach you." He moved closer, and Elena's instinct screamed at her to flinch back, but she held still. If he wanted her dead, she would be. "But first, you need to eat." Mortals have such fragile metabolisms, he gestured. And Elena noticed for the first time that a tray sat on the bedside table: bread, cheese, fruit, and a pewter cup of something that smelled like mulled wine. Her stomach clenched painfully at the sight. It's not poisoned, the vampire said dryly. If I wanted you harmed, there are far more efficient methods than contaminated food. Elena reached for the bread, pride warring with hunger. Hunger won. She tore into it with shaking hands, trying to maintain some dignity, and failing utterly. The vampire watched without comment, which somehow made it worse. What's your name? She asked between bites, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own desperation. Cassian Silvermark, Lord of the Old Quarter, Master of the First House, Keeper of the Old Laws. He rattled off the titles like a man reciting a shopping list. And you are? Elena Thorne. She didn't add her own former titles. They meant nothing. Now, just Elena. No one is just anything. Elena Thorne. Cassian settled back into his chair with inhuman stillness. You were educated, well-bred, judging by your diction and bearing. Something happened to put you on the streets. That's not your concern. It is now. His gray eyes held hers, and Elena felt the weight of centuries in that gaze. You're in my home, under my protection. That makes your story my concern. But he raised a hand before she could protest. You don't have to share it tonight. You're exhausted, frightened, and confused. Those are poor conditions for truth-telling. The unexpected mercy made Elena's throat tight. She looked down at her hands, at the bread she'd devoured without tasting. Why are you being kind? She whispered. I'm not kind. Cassian's voice was soft but absolute. I'm practical and curious. You did something impossible tonight, Elena Thorne. I need to understand why before I decide what to do with you. The words should have been threatening. Somehow, they felt almost like a promise. Chapter 3. The space between breath and shadow. Elena woke to absolute silence. Not the quiet of night, but the absence of sound that came when every living thing held its breath. The candles had burned low, casting long shadows across the guest room's walls. She lay still, listening for what had woken her, and heard nothing. No rain, no wind, no footsteps in distant corridors. Then she noticed the door was open. She'd locked it before sleeping, a useless gesture, probably, but one that made her feel fractionally safer. Now it stood ajar, revealing a slice of darkened hallway beyond. No light, no movement, just that profound, waiting silence. Elena rose slowly, her bare feet silent on the Persian rug. Someone had left fresh clothes on the chair while she slept, a simple dress in deep green, far finer than anything she'd worn in months. She pulled it on quickly, her fingers fumbling with unfamiliar fastenings, then moved toward the door. The hallway stretched in both directions, lit by gas lamps that burned with steady blue flames. The walls were covered in portraits, generations of stern-faced men and women whose eyes seemed to follow her as she walked. At the end of the corridor, a grand staircase spiraled downward into darkness. She should go back to the room, lock the door, wait until morning, if morning even came to this place. Instead, Elena descended. The stairs were marble, worn smooth by centuries of feet. Her hand trailed along the banister, and she noticed the wood was carved with symbols she didn't recognize: circles and crescents and strange geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air grew colder as she went down, and she caught scents she couldn't identify: old paper, dried roses, and something metallic underneath. The ground floor opened into a vast entrance hall. Moonlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the floor in shades of crimson and gold. And there, in the center of it all, stood Cassian. He faced away from her, perfectly still, his head tilted back as if studying the chandelier that hung 30 feet above. He'd changed clothes now, wore dark trousers and a white shirt that seemed to glow in the colored light. His hair fell loose around his shoulders. Elena stopped on the last step, suddenly aware that she was intruding on something private. But before she could retreat, Cassian spoke without turning. You don't sleep well. It wasn't a question. Elena's hand tightened on the banister. Neither do you, apparently. I don't sleep at all. He turned then, and the moonlight caught his face, making his features seem carved from marble. Not in the way you understand it. We enter a state of rest during daylight hours, something between sleep and death. But at night, he gestured vaguely. The hours stretch long when you've lived through too many of them. Elena descended the final step, drawn forward despite her better judgment. How long? How long have I lived? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. 347 years. I was turned during the Winter of Blood, when House Corvus tried to eliminate the Silvermark line entirely. Obviously, they failed. The casual way he said it 300 years as if discussing the weather made Elena's head spin. She moved closer, studying him in the strange light. There were no lines on his face, no gray in his hair, but his eyes held an exhaustion that went bone deep. You look tired, she said. Before she could stop herself, Cassian's expression shifted surprise, then something almost like pain. No one has said that to me in a very long time, because they're afraid of you. Yes, he didn't deny it. Fear is useful. It keeps the peace between houses. It protects my territory. But he trailed off, then shook his head. You should be sleeping. I tried. The silence woke me. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. The dress was beautiful, but thin, and the entrance hall was cold. This place doesn't sound like the city. Even at night, you can usually hear something: carriages, voices, dogs barking. Here, there's nothing. Wards. Cassian moved toward her, then past her, heading for a set of double doors to the left. The manor sits slightly outside normal space. Sound doesn't carry the same way. Time moves differently. It's disorienting for mortals at first. He pushed open the doors, revealing a library that made Elena's breath catch. Books line the walls from floor to ceiling, accessible by rolling ladders. A fireplace large enough to stand in dominated one wall, flames dancing without heat. Comfortable chairs were scattered throughout, and a grand piano sat in one corner, its surface gleaming. You can't sleep, you might as well read, Cassian said. Everything here is at your disposal. Elena entered slowly, her fingers trailing along leather spines. Why are you doing this? Being hospitable? Because you touched the Hound, and it didn't kill you. Because House Corvus will come looking for you. And I need to understand what makes you different before I decide how to handle their inquiry. He paused by the fireplace, his profile sharp in the flickering light. And because you looked at me and saw someone tired, not something dangerous. That's rare enough to be interesting. Elena pulled a book from the shelf without looking at the title. You're still dangerous. Yes. His voice was soft, almost gentle. I am. Don't forget that, Elena Thorne. She turned to face him fully, the book clutched to her chest like armor. You said you don't eat food, I mean. No, but you need blood? The word felt strange in her mouth, too clinical and too visceral at once. Cassian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, from people, from willing donors, contracted through house law, and compensated accordingly. I don't hunt. I haven't hunted in over a century. His gray eyes met hers. Contrary to popular belief, most of us prefer consent to conquest. House Corvus still follows the old ways. They believe in taking what they want, when they want it. It's why they attacked you. They saw prey, not a person. Something dark crossed his expression. It's also why they've been at war with my house for 200 years. Elena absorbed this, her mind, cataloging information like she used to do in university. And now I'm caught in the middle. Now you're under my protection. Which makes you a piece on the board, whether you want to be or not. Cassian moved to the window, gazing out at grounds Elena couldn't see from her angle. They'll send an envoy within the week. They'll demand to know why you're here, what you mean to me, whether my protection extends to formal sanctuary or merely temporary shelter. What will you tell them? He was quiet for a long moment, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. I don't know yet. The honesty surprised her. Elena set the book down on a nearby table and joined him at the window. Outside, she could see moonlit gardens that seemed to go on forever, hedges and fountains and statuary that shifted when she wasn't looking directly at them. I was engaged once, she said quietly, to a man from a good family. Then my father made some poor investments. Bad choices. People were hurt. The engagement ended. So did everything else. Cassian didn't look at her, but she felt his attention sharpen. And you ended up on the streets. I ended up nowhere. Which amounts to the same thing. Elena pressed her palm against the cold glass. Everyone I knew turned away. Every door closed. It's strange how quickly you become invisible when you have nothing left to offer. I know something about invisibility, Cassian said softly. About being seen only for what you are, never who. Their eyes met in the window's reflection, his ancient and gray, hers dark and too young for the weight they carried. Something passed between them, some recognition of shared loneliness that made Elena's breath catch. Then Cassian stepped back, breaking the moment. It's nearly dawn. You should rest while you can. Tomorrow, I'll begin teaching you the house laws. If you're to survive in this world, you need to understand its rules. Elena nodded, but didn't move immediately. Cassian? He paused in the doorway, looking back. Thank you, she said, for not leaving me in that alley. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Thank the Hound. It chose you first. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with a library full of secrets and the growing certainty that she'd stepped into something far more complex than simple rescue. Chapter 4. Lessons in Blood and Boneth. Education began at twilight. Elena had spent the day exploring the manor's public rooms, careful not to open any doors that felt too private. She'd found a conservatory full of night-blooming flowers, a gallery of weapons that looked both ancient and deadly, and a music room where dust motes danced in the last rays of sunlight filtering through heavy curtains. But she hadn't found Cassian. The manor felt empty during daylight hours, though she'd occasionally glimpse servants moving through distant corridors, pale, quiet people who vanished before she could speak to them. Now, as shadows lengthened and the gas lamps flickered to life, she heard footsteps in the hall outside her room. A single knock, then Cassian's voice. If you want to understand this world, meet me in the study. Second floor, East Wing. Elena found him standing before a massive wall covered in what looked like a family tree, though far more complex than any she'd seen. Lines connected names in intricate patterns, some marked with red ink, others in black or gold. Cassian held a glass of something dark that caught the lamplight like garnet. Wine? Elena asked, though she knew it wasn't. A blend, primarily animal, with supplements from contracted donors. He set the glass down on a desk cluttered with papers and leather-bound ledgers. I won't apologize for what I am, but I won't make you watch me feed either. Elena appreciated the courtesy, even as her mind cataloged the information. You said you'd teach me house law. I said I'd teach you to survive. Cassian gestured to the wall chart. This is the foundation of everything. The 5 great houses of the city: Silvermark, Corvus, Nightborn, Ashwood, and Crescent. We've ruled here for 4 centuries, since the Treaty of Shadows established our territories and laws. Elena stepped closer, studying the names. Some had dates beside them, births and deaths spanning centuries. You're all related? In the way that royalty is related through blood, politics, and grudges that outlive human memory. His finger traced a line from his own name up through generations. I'm the last of my direct line. My sister was killed during the Corvus Purge. My parents died decades before that, in a territorial dispute with House Nightborn. The casual way he recounted centuries of loss made Elena's chest ache. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago, but something in his voice suggested time didn't heal all wounds. It only taught you to carry them better. What matters now is understanding the current balance of power. House Corvus wants to expand into my territory. They've been probing my borders for years, testing my defenses, looking for weakness, and then I appeared. Elena understood politics, even if these particular politics involved immortal predators. A mortal under your protection is a weakness they can exploit, potentially. Cassian moved to another section of the wall, where a map showed the city divided into color-coded territories. But it's also an opportunity. House law states that any mortal who bonds with a house guardian like my Hound can claim formal sanctuary. It's an old law rarely invoked, but binding. Elena's pulse quickened. Sanctuary means they can't touch me. It means they can't touch you without declaring open war against my house. And they're not ready for that. Not yet. He turned to face her, his gray eyes intense. But Elena, understand this sanctuary comes at a cost. You'd be bound to Silvermark Manor, unable to leave my territory without permission. You'd be under my authority in all matters involving house politics. And the moment you step outside those protections, you become fair game again. The room felt suddenly smaller. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, thinking of the alley, the Corvus vampire's cold fingers on her wrist, the terror of being prey. Then she thought of the last 3 months, the hunger, the rejection, the slow erosion of everything she'd once been. What's the alternative? She asked quietly. Cassian's expression softened fractionally. I release you, provide you with funds and a reference to leave the city entirely. You start over somewhere the houses have no reach. Run away. The words tasted bitter. Become invisible again. Become safe. Elena studied the map, the careful divisions of power, the territories marked in different colors. House Silvermark's domain, colored in silver gray, covered the Old Quarter and the northern docks. It was substantial, but she could see how Corvus territory pressed against it from three sides, colored in blood-red ink. "You're surrounded," she observed. "I'm strategic. My territory includes the main trade routes and the cathedral district. Corvus wants that access." Cassian joined her at the map, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his body. "They've been patient, but patience has limits. Why tell me all this?" "I'm just," Elena trailed off, unsure how to finish. "You're the mortal who touched my hound and lived. You're educated, observant, and brave enough to speak honestly even when you're terrified." His voice was matter-of-fact. "Those qualities are valuable, Elena Thorne. Especially now." Before Elena could respond, a sound echoed through the manor, a bell, deep and resonant, ringing 3 times. Cassian's entire posture changed, becoming alert in a way that sent ice down her spine. "They're here," he said quietly. "Earlier than I expected." "Corvus?" "An envoy, most likely. Demanding answers about you." He moved to the desk, pulling on a formal coat that transformed him from merely dangerous to absolutely lethal in its elegance. "Stay here. Don't go near the windows. And Elena," he paused at the door. "Whatever you hear, don't come downstairs." What if they won't? His certainty was absolute. House law protects guests under formal parley. But it's going to get ugly. He vanished into the hallway, moving with that inhuman speed. Elena stood frozen for a moment, then moved to the window despite his warning. From here, she could see the manor's front approach. 3 figures stood in the circular drive, backlit by torches that burned with greenish flames. 2 men and a woman, the same ones from the alley. And behind them, a carriage drawn by horses that moved smoothly, their eyes reflecting light like mirrors. Elena watched as Cassian emerged from the manor's entrance, descending the steps with measured grace. He looked smaller from this distance, outnumbered, but something in his bearing suggested a coiled spring ready to unleash. The Corvus woman stepped forward, and even from this distance, Elena could see her smile sharp and triumphant. Words were exchanged, too low for Elena to hear. Cassian remained perfectly still, his posture rigid with controlled fury. Then the woman pulled something from her coat and held it up. Even from the window, Elena could make out what it was: a wanted notice, with her own face sketched on it. Her blood ran cold. The woman was speaking animatedly now, gesturing between the notice and the manor, making accusations, making demands. Cassian's response was a single word, delivered with enough force that Elena felt it in her bones, even through the glass. The Corvus vampires recoiled as if struck. The woman's smile vanished, replaced by naked fury. She lunged forward inhumanly fast, claws extending from her fingers. Cassian didn't move. He simply raised one hand, and the hound materialized from shadows, placing itself between them. Its growl was audible even through the closed window, a sound that promised violence. The standoff held for an endless moment. Then the Corvus woman stepped back, said something that made Cassian's shoulders tighten, and retreated to her carriage. Within seconds, they were gone, vanishing down the drive like smoke. Cassian stood alone in the torchlight, his head bowed, hands clenched at his sides. The hound pressed against his leg, and Elena saw him reach down to touch its massive head, a gesture so human, so weary, that it made her throat tight. When he finally turned back to the manor, his face was a mask of cold control, but Elena had seen beneath it, had glimpsed the weight of 300 years of battles, and losses and lonely nights spent, defending territory from enemies who never stopped. Circling, she was still standing at the window when he entered. The study minutes later. "They know you're here," Cassian said, without preamble. "They're claiming you're wanted for theft in their territory." "It's a lie, but a convenient one. What did you tell them?" His gray eyes met hers, and Elena saw the decision already made. "I told them you're under my protection. Formal sanctuary, effective immediately, without asking me first." Without time to ask, he moved to pour himself another glass of blood wine, his hand steady despite the tension radiating from his frame. They were going to invoke seizure rights, a law that allows them to claim criminals found in neutral spaces. "I had to establish your status before they could file the claim." Elena should have been angry at the presumption. Instead, she felt something closer to relief, followed immediately by terror at what she'd just become part of. "So I'm bound here now," she said quietly. "You're protected now." Cassian turned to face her fully. "I know it's not freedom, Elena, but it's survival. And right now, that's the best I can offer." She thought of the alley, the cold fingers, the casual cruelty in the Corvus woman's smile. Then she thought of Cassian standing alone against them, defending a mortal he barely knew, because it was the right thing to do. Thank you, Elena said. I know that cost you something. His expression flickered surprise, then something almost like pain. Everything costs something. The question is whether the price is worth paying. Chapter 5. When shadows strike 3, nights passed in fragile peace. Elena spent her days learning the manor's rhythms, the servants who appeared at dusk to light candles and prepare meals, the library that seemed to rearrange its shelves when she wasn't looking, the conservatory where night-blooming flowers released perfume that made her dreams strange and vivid, and Cassian, who appeared each evening to continue her education in house politics, vampire lore, and the intricate web of alliances that kept the city from descending into chaos. He never touched her, maintained a careful distance, even when they stood side by side studying maps or texts. But Elena felt the pull between them growing, stronger recognition and curiosity, and something deeper that neither of them acknowledged aloud. On the 4th night, everything shattered. Elena woke to the sound of breaking glass. Not the delicate tinkle of a dropped wine glass, but the violent crash of windows exploding inward. She bolted upright, heart hammering, as shouts echoed through the manor, rough voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize. The door to her room burst open. Cassian stood in the threshold, no longer the controlled lord she'd come to know. His eyes burned with that inhuman light, his fangs visible. Every line of his body coiled for violence. Get up, now. His voice was a command that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct. Elena scrambled from bed, still wearing the nightgown one of the servants had left for her. What's happening? Corvus isn't waiting for politics. Cassian grabbed her wrist, his grip ice cold but careful, and pulled her into the hallway. They're raiding the manor. 8 vampires, maybe more. They're claiming the right of pursuit for a wanted criminal. Me. The word came out flat. You? He didn't slow, dragging her toward a section of wall that looked solid until he pressed a hidden latch. A panel swung open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. This leads to the catacombs. Stay there. Don't come out until I come for you. What about you? I'm going to remind them why attacking House Silvermark is a fatal mistake. His smile was all predator, no humanity left in it. Go. Elena hesitated, caught between self-preservation and the inexplicable urge to stay with him. Then another crash sounded from below, closer now, and Cassian shoved her toward the stairs. Go. She went, stumbling down stone steps worn smooth by centuries of feet. Behind her, the panel clicked shut, leaving her in absolute darkness. Elena pressed her hand against the damp wall and kept moving, counting steps to anchor herself against rising panic. 20 steps, 30, 50. Above, she heard muffled sounds, shouts, crashes, the unmistakable sounds of combat. Something heavy hit a wall hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Elena's fingers found a landing, and she stopped, breathing hard in the suffocating blackness. She should keep going, hide deeper in the catacombs where they'd never find her. That's what Cassian wanted. That's what made sense. But sense had stopped applying the moment she'd touched the Hound. Elena turned and climbed back up the stairs, moving by touch and memory. At the top, she pressed her ear against the panel, listening. The sounds of fighting had moved. She could hear them more distantly now, toward the front of the manor. She found the release mechanism by feel and eased the panel open a crack. The hallway was chaos. Furniture overturned, paintings slashed, one of the gas lamps shattered and leaking fluid across the floor, and blood-dark smears of it on the walls. Though she couldn't tell if it belonged to attackers or defenders, Elena slipped out, keeping low, her bare feet silent on the runner carpet. She needed a weapon, needed something to even the impossible odds. The weapons gallery, she'd seen it during her explorations, full of ancient blades and implements of war. She made it 3 corridors before she heard footsteps behind her. Found you. The voice was male, amused, cultured. The little mortal who thinks she's worth protecting. Elena spun to find one of the Corvus vampires blocking her path, tall, blonde, with eyes like chips of amber. He moved toward her with lazy confidence, taking his time. Why rush when she had nowhere to go? Cassian Silvermark is fighting 4 of my brothers right now, he said conversationally. Even he can't win those odds. So I thought I'd collect you before things get messier. House Corvus rewards efficiency. Elena's back hit the wall. Her mind raced through everything Cassian had taught her, vampire weaknesses, house laws, ways mortals had survived encounters through history. None of it seemed useful when faced with a creature that could move faster than she could think. The Hound bonded with me, she said, forcing her voice steady. Killing me violates the Treaty of Shadows. Article 7. Blood-bonded mortals are protected by laws written when humans were food, not pets. The vampire was close enough now that she could smell rain and iron on him. Laws change little, mortal. Power is what matters. His hand shot out, fingers closing around her throat. Not enough to crush, but enough to lift her onto her toes, cutting off air. Elena clawed at his wrist uselessly, black spots dancing in her vision. Then a roar shook the manor, deep, primal, the sound of something ancient and furious unleashed. The vampire's grip loosened fractionally as his head snapped toward the noise. The Hound came around the corner like living shadow and fury. It didn't slow, didn't hesitate, simply crashed into the vampire with enough force to tear him away from Elena and send them both smashing through a door into the room beyond. Elena collapsed against the wall, gasping, her throat already bruising. Through the shattered doorway, she could see the Hound pinning the vampire to the floor, its massive jaws closing around his shoulder. The vampire screamed a horrible sound, high and desperate. Call it off, he shrieked. I yield. I invoke parley rights. The Hound didn't move. Its eyes found Elena, burning with that otherworldly light waiting. Let him go, Elena whispered, her voice raw. Immediately, the Hound released him. The vampire scrambled backward, clutching his mangled shoulder, his amber eyes wide with shock. The Hound moved to stand between them, a living wall of protection, its attention never leaving the injured vampire. Footsteps approached fast, purposeful. Cassian appeared in the hallway, blood splattered across his white shirt, a cut healing on his cheek. He took in the scene with a single glance, Elena against the wall, the injured Corvus vampire on the floor. The Hound standing guard. I told you to stay in the catacombs. His voice was dangerously quiet. He would have found me eventually. Elena's legs felt weak, but she pushed away from the wall. Better to face it on my terms. Something shifted in Cassian's expression, approval, mixed with exasperation and concern. He turned his attention to the vampire on the floor. You have 10 seconds to leave my territory before I let the Hound finish what it started. And you tell your house this. The mortal is mine. Any further attempts to seize her will be considered acts of war. The vampire fled, moving with wounded speed that still put human runners to shame. His blood left a trail across the floor as he went. Cassian moved to Elena, his cold fingers tilting her chin up to examine the bruises forming on her throat. His jaw clenched, fury radiating from him in waves. You could have been killed, he said softly. So could you. Elena met his eyes, refusing to look away. You were fighting 4 of them alone. I'm 300 years old. I can handle 4 Corvus hunters. But his thumb brushed gently over the bruises, and Elena saw something in his face that looked almost like fear. You're mortal, fragile. One wrong move and then what? I'd be gone? Elena's voice hardened. I've been dying slowly for 3 months, Cassian. Starving, freezing, disappearing piece by piece. At least here, I'm fighting back. At least here, I matter. The words hung between them, raw and true. Cassian's hand was still on her throat, his touch careful, despite the violence that had just filled the manor. This close, Elena could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of fighting the same battles century after century. You matter, he said quietly. That's the problem. Before Elena could ask what he meant, the Hound pressed against her leg, whining softly. She looked down to find it watching her with those burning eyes, and understanding clicked into place. It wasn't you who sent the Hound to save me just now, she said slowly. Was it? Cassian's expression confirmed it. No, it was already moving before I reached you. The bond is stronger than I thought. He stepped back, putting distance between them again. The Hound is choosing you, Elena. Not just protecting you because I commanded it, but actually bonding with you. That's never happened before. Not in for centuries. Elena's hand found the Hound's massive head, her fingers threading through its dark fur. It leaned into her touch, and she felt warmth radiating from its body despite the shadows that clung to its edges. What does that mean? It means, Cassian said carefully, that you're no longer just under my protection. You're becoming part of House Silvermark itself. And that changes everything. Chapter 6. The weight of Centurist Manor took 2 days to repair. Elena watched servants move through the damaged halls with quiet efficiency, replacing shattered windows, rehanging torn paintings, scrubbing blood from marble floors. No one spoke of the attack directly, but she caught whispers 8 Corvus vampires had entered, only 6 had left. 2 bodies had been dragged away before dawn. Reduced to ash by whatever ancient magic protected Silvermark territory, Cassian had vanished into his private chambers immediately after the raid, emerging only at dusk to inspect the repairs and issue orders in clipped, controlled tones. He avoided Elena's eyes, maintained even more distance than before, and the careful walls he'd built around himself seemed higher than ever. On the third night, she'd had enough. Elena found him in the portrait gallery, standing before a painting of a young woman in 18th century dress. The woman had dark hair and Cassian's gray eyes, and she was laughing at something beyond the frame's edge, caught in a moment of pure, unguarded joy. Your sister, Elena said quietly. Cassian didn't turn. Marianne. She was 23 when she was turned 19 when this was painted. She loved music and poetry and terrible jokes. His voice was carefully neutral. House Corvus killed her during the purge. They made it slow. Elena moved to stand beside him, studying the painted face. How long ago? 147 years. Long enough that most nights I can almost forget. Then something happens, a raid, a threat, a reminder that the war never really ends, and it's like it happened yesterday. He finally looked at her, and Elena saw exhaustion etched into every line of his face. That's the curse of immortality, Elena. Not the bloodlust or the daylight restrictions. It's remembering everything. Every loss. Every failure. Every person you couldn't save. Is that why you saved me? Elena asked. Because you couldn't save her? Maybe. He turned away from the portrait, moving toward the gallery windows that overlooked the gardens. Or maybe I'm just tired of losing. Tired of watching Corvus take, while I hold defensive positions and wait for the next attack. Elena followed, drawn by something in his voice, a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the Lord. You're not just holding defensive positions. You're protecting people. Your servants, your territory, the mortals who live under your authority. That matters. Does it? Cassian's laugh was bitter. I protect them from other vampires while feeding on their blood. I'm a monster playing at civilization, Elena. Don't mistake pragmatism for virtue. You use willing donors. You follow laws. You could take whatever you wanted, but you don't. Elena stopped beside him, close enough to feel the cold radiating from his body. That's not playing at civilization. That's choosing it, every night, even when it's harder. Cassian was silent for a long moment, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. The Hound is bonding with you, he said finally. Do you understand what that means? You said I'm becoming part of House Silvermark. More than that. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. The Hound was created 300 years ago, during the Winter of Blood. My parents were dead, my sister was dying, and Corvus had breached our gates. I was newly turned, barely in control, and I knew I was going to lose everything. Elena's breath caught at the raw pain in his voice. So I did something forbidden, Cassian continued. I took my own grief, my rage, my love for everyone I'd lost, and I bound it into a guardian. I ripped out everything that made me vulnerable and gave it form and fury. The Hound is all the emotion I couldn't afford to feel, all the humanity I couldn't afford to keep. It's been protecting this house ever since. Understanding crashed over Elena like a wave. That's why you're so controlled, so careful. You gave away your capacity to feel deeply, yes. To love, to grieve, to hope. His voice was flat, matter of fact. I can still experience emotions, but distantly, like hearing music through thick walls. It made me a better lord, better strategist. I could make hard choices without sentiment clouding my judgment, but it made you lonely, Elena whispered. Cassian's expression flickered surprise, then something almost like relief at being understood, profoundly. But loneliness was preferable to the alternative, to feeling everything and failing anyway. Elena thought of the Hound, pressing against her leg, choosing her. And now it's bonding with me. What happens if the bond completes? I don't know. Cassian's admission was stark. It's never chosen anyone before. But theoretically, if the bond fully forms, you'd become its anchor. The emotions I bound into it would start to recognize you as not a replacement for what I lost, but something new, something worth protecting on its own terms. And you? Elena's heart hammered. What would happen to you? I'd start feeling again, properly. Everything I've kept at distance for 3 centuries would come rushing back. He met her eyes, and Elena saw fear, the real human fear. I'd be vulnerable again, Elena, and I'm not sure I'd survive it. The weight of his confession hung between them. Elena understood what he was really saying, that letting her in, letting the bond complete, meant risking the carefully constructed armor that had kept him functional through centuries of loss. You could break the bond, she said quietly. Send me away before it's complete. I could. Cassian's voice was soft. But I won't. Why not? He was quiet for so long that Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because for the first time in 147 years, I don't want to. Because watching you face down a Corvus vampire with nothing but courage and intelligence reminded me why any of this matters. Because, he stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Because you see me, Elena, not the Lord, or the monster, or the strategic position. You see someone tired, someone lonely, someone trying to do the right thing in a world that doesn't reward it. And that's rare enough to be worth the risk. Elena's throat tightened. She thought of all the people who'd turned away when her life fell apart, all the doors that closed, all the carefully maintained distance. And here was someone offering the opposite connection, despite the cost. I'm scared, she admitted, of this world, of what I'm becoming part of caring about someone who could live forever while she trailed off. While you're mortal, fragile, temporary. Cassian's expression softened. I know, that's another complexity we'll have to navigate. But Elena, you've been surviving the impossible for months. You touched a creature made of grief and rage, and it chose gentleness. You faced down vampires who should have terrified you into paralysis. You're stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding on. That's what strength looks like. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched the bruises on her throat, still visible, still tender. Holding on when everything tells you to let go. That's the hardest kind of courage. His fingers were ice cold against her skin, but Elena didn't flinch. This close, she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, the fine scars on his hands from centuries of battles. Could see past the vampire to the man who'd been turned at 26 and forced to become something else entirely. What was your name? She asked suddenly. Before you became Lord Silvermark. Cassian blinked, clearly surprised. Just Cassian. My family wasn't nobility. We were merchants, successful ones, but common. The lordship came after I was turned, after I'd proven I could hold territory and enforce laws. Why? Because everyone calls you Lord Silvermark or Master or Sir. No one just says your name. Elena held his gaze. And I think you need to be reminded that you're still a person, not just a position. Something in his expression cracked just for a moment, just enough for Elena to glimpse the overwhelming loneliness underneath. Then he collected himself, stepping back, rebuilding those walls. The bond is accelerating, he said, his voice carefully neutral again. The Hound has been circling you constantly. It only leaves your side when I summon it directly. And even then, it's reluctant. Within a few more days, the connection will be permanent. And then we deal with the consequences. Starting with House Corvus, Cassian moved toward the gallery doors. They won't accept what happened during the raid. They lost to vampires and gained nothing. They'll escalate. What will they do? He paused in the doorway, his profile sharp in the lamplight. They'll demand a formal inquiry. Council of Houses, neutral territory, both sides presenting evidence and arguments. It's the next step before open war. Will they rule in our favor? I don't know. Cassian's honesty was stark. The other houses want peace, but they also want to maintain the status quo. A mortal bonding with a house guardian breaks precedent. Some will see it as evolution. Others will see it as dangerous instability. Elena absorbed this, her mind already working through implications. When is the inquiry? Within the week, most likely. You'll need to testify. Tell them how the bond formed, why the Hound chose you. His gray eyes met hers. They'll try to discredit you, make you seem manipulative or unstable. Can you handle that? I stood in front of lecture halls and defended my thesis while professors tried to tear apart every argument. I can handle vampire politics. Elena's voice was steady, even if her hands weren't. Besides, I don't really have a choice, do I? You always have a choice. Cassian's voice softened. I'll honor sanctuary regardless of how the inquiry goes. You'll be safe here, even if it costs me political standing. That's not a choice. That's you sacrificing for me again. Elena moved closer, driven by impulse and something deeper. I want to fight for this. For you. For whatever this is becoming. Cassian's carefully controlled expression slipped again, and Elena saw wonder there and fear. You don't know what you're asking for. Then tell me. Teach me. Stop protecting me from the truth, and let me choose with full knowledge. For a long moment, they stood there, the air between them charged with possibility and danger. Then Cassian nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow night, I'll show you everything. The blood oaths, the house laws, the cost of immortality. And then you can decide if this is really what you want." Chapter 7. Blood and Testament. Summons arrived at midnight, delivered by a messenger in silver and black house Nightborn's colors. The neutral arbiters of vampire law. Elena watched from the library window as Cassian accepted the sealed letter, his expression unreadable. The messenger departed without a word, vanishing into shadows that seemed darker than they should be. When Cassian entered the library moments later, he held the letter like it might bite. "3 nights," he said, without preamble. "The Council of Houses convenes to hear Corvus's formal complaint against me. Illegal harboring of a wanted criminal. Abuse of guardian bond rights. Endangerment of house peace through reckless sanctuary." Elena set down the book she'd been pretending to read. "All lies, all legally defensible positions, if they can prove intent." Cassian broke the seal and scanned the contents, his jaw tightening with each line. "They're bringing witnesses. Documentation. They've been building this case since the night you touched the Hound. Then we build ours." Elena rose, moving to the desk where she'd spent the past 2 days studying vampire law texts Cassian had provided. Article 7 protects blood-bonded mortals. Article 12 establishes guardian choice as sovereign. And Article 23 states that any mortal who forms an autonomous bond with a house guardian becomes de facto member of that house. With full legal protections, Cassian looked up, something almost like pride flickering across his features. "You've memorized the treaty, the relevant sections." "I had good motivation." Elena pulled out her notes pages of careful handwriting cross-referencing laws, precedents, and loopholes. "The problem is Article 7 has never been tested with a guardian like the Hound. All previous cases involve familiars or bound servants, not constructs made from pure emotion, which is why they'll argue the Hound's bond doesn't qualify." Cassian set the letter down, rubbing his temples in a gesture so human it made Elena's chest ache. "They'll say it's an anomaly, that I manipulated you into contact with it, that the bond is invalid because the Hound isn't technically alive in the traditional sense. Is it alive?" The question hung between them. Cassian was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes distant. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I gave it form, purpose, and power. I bound my own emotions into its essence. But does that make it alive, or just a very sophisticated magical construct?" He met her gaze. "What I do know is that it chose you. And choice implies consciousness. Will, something more than programming." Elena thought of the Hound pressing against her leg, the warmth of its fur, the intelligence in those burning eyes. "It feels alive to me." "Then we argue that. Your testimony against their technicalities." Cassian moved to stand beside her at the desk, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "But Elena, you need to understand what you're walking into. The council chamber is neutral ground, but it's also theater. They'll question your character, your motives, your sanity. They'll suggest you're delusional or opportunistic or both. And I won't be able to defend you during testimony. House law requires silence from the accused until judgment, so I defend myself." Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. "I've done it before. Different venue, same principle. This isn't a university debate." Cassian's tone held warning. "These are mortals who've been manipulating politics since before your grandparents were born. They'll look for weakness and exploit it without mercy. Then I won't show weakness." Elena turned to face him fully. "Cassian, I'm not fragile. I'm not some helpless mortal who needs constant protection. I survived 3 months on the streets. I survived Corvus, vampires trying to seize me. I can survive a council inquiry." His expression softened fractionally. "I know, but knowing you're capable and watching you face danger are different things. And the past few days have," he trailed off, seeming to struggle with words. "Have what?" "Made me remember what it feels like to care whether someone lives or dies." The confession was quiet, almost reluctant. "The bond is affecting me, Elena. The walls I built are starting to crack. I find myself worrying about you in ways I haven't worried about anyone in over a century. It's unsettling." Elena's breath caught. She'd felt the shift to the way his gaze lingered when he thought she wasn't looking. The careful way he positioned himself between her and any potential threat. The increasing difficulty he seemed to have maintaining his usual distance. "Is that a bad thing?" she asked quietly. "I don't know." Cassian's voice held a vulnerability she'd never heard before. Part of me wants to run from it, break the bond before it goes further, send you somewhere safe where I can go back to feeling nothing. But another part, he stopped, his jaw clenching. Another part wants to keep you, wants to see where this leads, consequences be damned. His gray eyes met hers, and Elena saw centuries of loneliness warring with fear in their depths. That's the part that terrifies me, because I stopped being selfish a very long time ago. I can't afford to want things for myself. But with you, I'm starting to forget why. Elena's hand moved before she could think better of it, covering his where it rested on the desk. His skin was ice cold, but he didn't pull away. Maybe it's not selfish, she said softly. Maybe it's just human. Or whatever counts as human when you've lived 300 years. Human. Cassian's laugh was hollow. I gave up claim to that word the night I became this. Did you? Elena tightened her grip. Because from where I'm standing, you seem more human than most of the people who turned their backs on me when I needed help. You protect the vulnerable. You honor your word. You carry guilt for things that weren't your fault. That sounds pretty human to me. Something in his expression broke just for a moment, just enough for Elena to see the man underneath the monster he thought himself to be. His hand turned beneath hers, fingers threading through her own, and the contrast between his cold skin and her warmth was stark. You're dangerous, he whispered. More dangerous than any Corvus attack. Because I make you feel? Because you make me hope. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it made her throat tight. And hope is the cruelest thing for someone who's lived as long as I have. Because eventually, you'll age. You'll grow old and die, and I'll have to watch it happen while staying exactly as I am now. That's what comes from caring about mortals, Elena. Inevitable loss. The words should have been a warning, but they felt more like a confession. Elena understood what he was really saying, that he was already into deep, already cared too much to walk away cleanly. Then we have now, she said. Whatever time we have it. Isn't that worth something? Everything. The word was barely audible. That's the problem. Before Elena could respond, a howl echoed through the manor, long, mournful, resonant. The Hound, calling from somewhere in the grounds. Both of them turned toward the sound, and Elena felt the pull of the bond like a physical tug behind her sternum. It feels you, Cassian said quietly. Your distress, your confusion, your determination. The bond is nearly complete now. Another day, maybe two, and it'll be permanent. Will it hurt? I don't know. When I created it, the binding felt like tearing myself apart. But you're not creating it, you're accepting what's already there. It might be different. He squeezed her hand once, then released it, stepping back. We should practice your testimony. The council will ask specific questions and your answers need to be precise. One wrong word could invalidate the entire sanctuary claim. Elena nodded, trying to shift back into analytical mode, even as her heart still raced from their conversation. What will they ask? Everything. How you came to be in Corvus territory. Why you were in the alley that night. The exact circumstances of first contact with the Hound. Your state of mind, your intentions, your understanding of what touching it meant. Cassian moved to the desk, pulling out fresh paper. And they'll ask about your past. Your father's scandal, your broken engagement, your time on the streets. They'll try to paint you as desperate and calculating. I was desperate. Elena's voice was steady. I'm not ashamed of that. You shouldn't be. But they'll use it against you. Cassian began writing questions, his handwriting elegant and precise. They'll suggest you sought out the Hound deliberately, that you manipulated circumstances to gain sanctuary, that you're exploiting house law for personal gain. None of that is true. Truth is secondary to perception in council chambers. What matters is what they can prove or disprove, what testimony sounds credible versus suspect. He finished writing and turned to her. Which is why we practice until your answers are flawless. Until nothing they throw at you can shake your composure. Elena took the paper, studying the questions. They were brutal in their directness, designed to unsettle and confuse. But she'd faced hostile examination committees before, had learned to maintain calm under pressure. All right, she said. Let's begin. They worked through the night, Cassian playing the role of hostile counselor with uncomfortable accuracy. He challenged every answer, twisted her words, implied motives she'd never had. It was exhausting and frustrating and absolutely necessary. By dawn, Elena's voice was hoarse, but her responses were sharp. She'd learned to anticipate traps, to answer questions directly without volunteering information that could be used against her, to maintain dignity even when accusations flew. Better, Cassian said, as gray light began filtering through the windows. But you'll need to be perfect. The council won't give you the benefit of doubt. Then I'll be perfect. Elena set down the practice questions, her hand cramping from notes. Cassian, what happens if they rule against us? His expression shuddered. Then Corvus can challenge my authority to grant you sanctuary. They'll demand your extradition to face their false charges. And I'll have to either surrender you, his voice hardened, or declare war. Would you? The question escaped before Elena could stop it. Declare war. Risk everything you've protected for centuries. For me. Cassian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, yes, because you're right, some things are worth the cost. And watching Corvus take one more thing I care about isn't something I can live with. Not again. Chapter 8. The Council of Shadows. The council chamber existed in a place between places. Elena felt it the moment Cassian's carriage passed through the gates of Nightborne Manor, a subtle shift in reality. Like stepping from solid ground onto a ship's deck. The air grew thick and still, carrying scents of incense and old parchment, and something metallic that made her teeth ache. Neutral ground, Cassian murmured beside her. He wore formal attire, black coat with silver embroidery, his hair tied back with a ribbon the color of smoke. Created by blood magic. When the 5 houses signed the treaty, no violence is possible here. No compulsion, no domination, no physical force of any kind, but words can still wound. Elena smoothed her borrowed dress, deep burgundy silk that one of the servants had altered to fit her. It felt like armor and exposure all at once. Words are the only weapons permitted. His hand found hers briefly, a touch of ice-cold reassurance. Remember everything we practiced. Answer only what's asked. Don't elaborate. Don't let them provoke you into anger. The carriage stopped before a building that looked ancient even by vampire standards, gray stone covered in climbing ivy, narrow windows that glowed with foxfire light. As they descended, Elena saw other carriages arriving. House Corvus in crimson and black, House Ashwood in forest green, House Crescent in pale blue. Each bearing vampires in formal dress, their faces beautiful and terrible and ageless. The Hound materialized from shadows at Elena's side, pressing against her leg. Cassian had argued for its presence. The bond itself was evidence. After all, the council had agreed, though Elena suspected they wanted to observe the creature's behavior firsthand. Inside, the chamber was circular, with a domed ceiling painted with constellations that moved across artificial sky. 5 thrones set at equal distances around the perimeter, each occupied by a vampire whose presence made the air feel heavier. At the center stood a raised platform with 2 chairs, one for the accused, one for witnesses. Elena recognized the Corvus matriarch immediately, Lady Serafini. Her pale hair elaborate with braids and jewels. Her crimson dress cut to display power rather than modesty. She watched Elena enter with eyes like chips of amber. Her smile all teeth and malice. Lord Silvermark. The voice came from the largest throne house, Nightborne's patriarch. An ancient vampire whose dark skin seemed to drink in light. You stand accused of illegal harboring and manipulation of house law. How do you answer? Cassian moved to the accused's chair with perfect composure. Not guilty on all counts. The mortal Elena Thorne formed an autonomous bond with my house guardian through no intervention on my part. I granted sanctuary as house law requires. All protocols were followed. Protocols? Lady Serafini's laugh was crystalline and cutting. How convenient that this autonomous bond occurred precisely when we were exercising legal pursuit of a wanted criminal. How convenient that your creature chose this particular mortal to protect. The Hound's choices are its own, Cassian replied evenly. I don't control what it silence. The Nightborne Patriarch's command was absolute. You'll have opportunity to speak later. First, we hear from the mortal. His gaze shifted to Elena. Approach the witness chair. Elena walked forward, the Hound moving with her until Cassian called it back. It went reluctantly, settling at his feet, but never taking its burning gaze from her. She sat in the chair, aware of every vampire eye upon her, and forced her breathing to remain steady. State your name and circumstances. This came from the Ashwood representative, a woman whose green eyes held unexpected kindness. Elena Thorne, formerly of the Merchant District, currently under sanctuary at Silvermark Manor. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. Describe the events of the night in question. The Nightborne Patriarch leaned forward. Omit no details. Elena had practiced this 100 times, but the reality of speaking before immortal predators made her mouth dry. She told it exactly as it happened: the alley, the Corvus hunters, the hound's appearance, her instinctive gesture of gratitude. She kept her tone factual, her gaze steady, even when Lady Serafini's smile grew more predatory. "And you expect us to believe," Serafini interrupted, when Elena finished, "that you had no knowledge of what you were doing? That touching a legendary guardian creature was mere impulse? I knew it was dangerous. I didn't know it would bond with me." Elena met her amber eyes without flinching. "I was exhausted, terrified, and grateful to be alive. I said thank you because it felt right. Nothing more calculated than that." "How convenient that your gratitude resulted in legal protection." Serafini rose from her throne, moving closer with liquid grace. "Tell me, Miss Thorne, what were you doing in Corvus territory that night?" "Taking a shortcut through the merchant district." "Why?" Elena's jaw tightened. "Because the charity shelter had closed its doors, and I needed to reach the northern quarter before full dark." "Why not take the main streets?" Serafini circled the witness chair like a shark, scenting blood. "Surely you knew the merchant district was dangerous after dark." "I knew. But the main streets have toll collectors, and I had no money." The admission tasted bitter. "I gambled that speed would protect me." "I was wrong. You were trespassing." Serafini's voice sharpened. "House Corvus has legal claim to anyone caught in our territory without authorization. Yet when my hunters attempted to exercise that claim, Silvermark's creature interfered. Your hunters were going to enslave me." Elena's voice hardened, despite her intentions to remain calm. "They spoke of servants who understand their place. That's not legal pursuit, that's abduction." "You have no proof of." "I have her testimony, given under council law where lies are impossible." The Ashwood representative's interruption was gentle but firm. "Continue, Miss Thorne. What happened after the Hound appeared?" Elena described the white light, waking in Silvermark Manor, the subsequent Corvus raid. With each detail, she felt the chamber's attention shifting, saw doubt creeping into some faces, calculation into others. "The raid violated parley law," Cassian interjected, earning a sharp look from the patriarch. "You'll speak when permitted." "Lord Silvermark." But the patriarch's tone suggested agreement. "Miss Thorne, describe the bond's progression. What do you feel from the creature?" Elena hesitated, searching for words. "Protection, recognition. It feels lonely, like it's been waiting for something it didn't know it needed. And when it's near me, that loneliness eases." The chamber went absolutely still. Elena realized she'd said something significant, though she didn't understand what. The Hound whined softly from its position at Cassian's feet, and she felt the bond pull tight across the distance between them. "Lonely." The Crescent representative spoke for the first time, an elderly vampire whose pale blue eyes were sharp with intelligence. "Lord Silvermark, explain what your guardian is." Cassian's composure cracked fractionally. "It's a construct, created from bound emotion during the Winter of Blood." "What emotion?" "Grief, rage, loss." His voice dropped. "Everything I felt watching my family die and being unable to stop it." The Crescent vampire nodded slowly. "And loneliness, perhaps? The isolation of being the last of your line?" "Yes." The admission was barely audible. "Then the mortal's testimony makes sense. She recognized the loneliness because she carries it herself." The Crescent vampire's gaze shifted to Elena. "You lost everything too, didn't you, child? Family, position, future. You understand what it means to be alone." Elena's throat tightened. "Yes, that's what the creature recognized. Not manipulation, not calculation, kinship." The vampire sat back. It saw itself reflected in her, and it chose connection over solitude. "That's not a violation of house law. That's evidence of consciousness, of will, of the very autonomy Article 12 is designed to protect." Lady Serafini's expression twisted with fury. "This is absurd. We're allowing a human's emotional appeal to override centuries of precedent. We're allowing evidence to speak for itself." The Nightborn patriarch's voice cut through her protest. "The bond exists. The creature chose freely." The mortal responded with kindness rather than exploitation. "Unless you can prove actual manipulation, House Corvus, your claim fails. Then I present new evidence." Serafini's smile returned, sharp and triumphant. She pulled a document from her coat. A witness statement from Lord Thaddeus Mercier, the mortal's former fiancé. He testifies that Miss Thorne demonstrated a pattern of manipulation during their engagement, using emotional appeals to extract promises and resources. That she is, by nature, calculating and deceptive. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Thaddeus, the man who'd promised forever and vanished the moment her father's scandal broke, now providing testimony to destroy her last chance at safety. That's not, she started, but the patriarch raised a hand. Is this testimony given under oath? It is. Serafini's amber eyes gleamed. Shall we summon Lord Mercier to speak directly? No, Cassian's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. I invoke right of character, witness. As the accused and the mortal's current guardian, I have authority to speak on her behalf. The patriarch considered this. Granted. Speak, Lord Silvermark. Cassian rose, and Elena had never seen him look more dangerous, cold fury radiating from every line of his body. I've known Elena Thorne for less than 2 weeks. In that time, I've watched her face vampires who should have terrified her into paralysis. I've watched her study house law until her eyes ached, determined to understand the world she'd stumbled into. I've watched her show kindness to a creature made of rage and grief, simply because it felt right. He moved toward Elena's chair, his gray eyes never leaving Serafini. Whatever her former fiancé claims about manipulation, I see only courage, only integrity. Only someone trying to survive in a world that turned its back on her through no fault of her own. His voice dropped, becoming more intimate. And I see someone who makes me remember why any of this matters. Why protecting the vulnerable is worth the cost. Why choosing honor over convenience is what separates us from monsters. The chamber was absolutely silent. Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. Cassian's words weren't just defense, they were confession, spoken before the most powerful vampires in the city. That is quite a character, witness, the crescent vampire said softly. Though it also suggests you may not be entirely objective. Lord Silvermark, I'm not. Cassian's admission was stark. But objectivity isn't what's required here. Evidence is. And the evidence is clear. Elena Thorne bonded with my guardian through no manipulation on either side. She deserves sanctuary under house law. Anything less is injustice. The patriarch exchanged glances with the other council members. Some silent communication passed between them, centuries-old vampires reading nuances Elena couldn't perceive. Finally, the patriarch spoke. We'll deliberate. Both parties will wait outside until judgment is rendered. Chapter 9. The price of truth. Waiting room was smaller than Elena expected, a stone chamber with a single window overlooking gardens that existed in perpetual twilight. Cassian stood at that window, motionless as a statue, while the Hound pressed against Elena's legs where she sat on a velvet settee. They'd been waiting for over an hour. No sound came from the council chamber, no indication of how deliberation was progressing. Just silence and the weight of uncertainty. You shouldn't have said those things. Elena's voice broke the quiet finally. About me making you remember. About not being objective. You gave them ammunition. I gave them truth. Cassian didn't turn from the window. After 300 years of careful political maneuvering, I'm tired of pretending I don't care about the outcome. They were going to sense it anyway, might as well own it. But if they rule against us because they think you're compromised, then they rule against us. He turned finally. And Elena saw exhaustion etched into his features. Elena, I've spent centuries being what everyone needed me to be. The perfect lord. The strategic ally. The controlled predator who never let emotion cloud judgment. And it made me effective. But it also made me. He trailed off, searching for words. Empty. Going through motions without remembering why they mattered. Elena rose, the Hound moving with her as she approached him. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've protected. You're not. His voice was soft but absolute. You're the reason I remember why I was protecting it in the first place. There's a difference. His hand lifted, hesitating, then settled on her cheek, ice-cold palm against warm skin. Whatever the council decides, I don't regret what I said in there. I meant every word. The touch sent shivers through Elena. That had nothing to do with temperature. This close, she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, the sharp line of his jaw, the slight part of his lips that revealed the edges of fangs he usually kept hidden. He looked at her like she was something precious and terrifying all at once. Cassian, she started. But the chamber door opened with a resonant boom. The nightborn patriarch stood in the threshold, his expression unreadable. The council has reached judgment. Return to the chamber. The walk back felt endless. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, and she felt the Hound's tension through the bond, its awareness that everything balanced on the next few minutes. Cassian's hand found the small of her back, a brief touch of reassurance, then withdrew as they entered the circular room. All 5 council members had returned to their thrones. Lady Serafini's expression was fury barely contained. The others were harder to read, ancient faces that had perfected neutrality over centuries. Elena Thorne, the patriarch's voice carried weight that pressed against Elena's chest. The council has reviewed all evidence, testimony, and precedent. We find that your bond with the Silvermark Guardian occurred through autonomous choice on both sides, with no evidence of manipulation or coercion. Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. But the patriarch wasn't finished. However, the nature of this bond presents unprecedented complications. A mortal bonding with a construct made from vampire emotion creates questions about consent, about the definition of consciousness, about the boundaries between houses and humanity. He paused, letting the words settle. Therefore, the council rules as follows. Your sanctuary is granted and legally binding. House Corvus may not pursue you for alleged crimes that occurred during legal trespass. You are, in all legal senses, a member of House Silvermark, with full protections. But Cassian's voice was tight. There was always a but in vampire politics, but the bond itself must be monitored. Every lunar month, you will report to this council for examination. We must ensure the bond remains stable, that it doesn't create dangerous precedent or destabilize the balance between houses. The patriarch's gaze shifted to Cassian. And Lord Silvermark, you will be held personally responsible for any consequences of this bond. Should it prove harmful to Miss Thorne or to House Peace, the penalties will be severe. I accept those terms. Cassian's response was immediate. Do you, Miss Thorne? The patriarch's attention returned to Elena. Monthly examination by the council. Your life under constant scrutiny. The knowledge that any misstep could bring consequences not just to yourself, but to the house that protects you. Do you accept these conditions? Elena thought of the alternative, leaving the city, starting over in some distant place where vampires held no power. A life of safety and invisibility, free from supernatural politics and impossible bonds. It would be easier, simpler, lonely. She looked at Cassian, saw the careful neutrality he wore like armor, the way he was giving her space to choose without pressure. But she also saw the hope in his eyes, fragile and new, like something just learning to exist. I accept, Elena said clearly. Lady Serafini rose from her throne with a sound of disgust. This is a mistake. Mark my words, this bond will bring nothing but chaos. And when it does, House Corvus will be ready to restore proper order. She swept from the chamber, her crimson dress trailing behind her like blood. The other council members exchanged glances, but none contradicted her exit. The Ashwood representative offered Elena a small, sad smile. The Crescent vampire nodded with something that might have been approval. And the Nightborn patriarch simply said, You are dismissed. May you prove this decision wise. Outside in the twilight gardens, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. The Hound pressed against her legs, and she buried her fingers in its dark fur, feeling the bond settle, still present, still growing, but no longer under immediate threat. You could have chosen differently. Cassian spoke quietly beside her. You could have taken the escape I offered and started fresh somewhere safe. I know. Elena looked up at him. This vampire who'd defended her before the most powerful beings in the city, who'd risked his carefully maintained neutrality for someone he'd known less than 2 weeks. But I'm tired of running from things. And I'm tired of being alone. So am I. The admission seemed to cost him something. 3 centuries is a long time to go through motions without feeling them. I'd forgotten what it was like to care about someone, to want them to stay, not just for political advantage, but because, he trailed off, struggling, because they make you feel less alone. Elena finished softly. Yes. His hand found hers, cold fingers threading through warm ones. The bond is nearly complete now. Another day, perhaps 2. When it finalizes, everything I bound into, the Hound will recognize you as its anchor. My grief, my rage, my capacity to love, all of it will flow back to me through your connection to the creature. Will it hurt? I don't know, but I'm less afraid of pain than I am of. He paused, his gray eyes searching hers. Of caring this much and losing you anyway. Of centuries more existence, with the memory of you fading like everything else I've loved. Elena's throat tightened. She understood what he was really saying, that she was mortal, temporary, destined to age and die while he remained frozen in time. That any future between them had an expiration date written into its very nature. Then we don't think about centuries, she said, echoing her own words from days ago. We think about now, about what we have, while we have it. Is that enough for you? His voice was raw. Knowing that eventually isn't now, Elena stepped closer, closing the space between them. Right now, I'm alive, I'm safe, and I'm with someone who makes me want to be brave instead of invisible. That's more than I've had in months. It's enough. Cassian's free hand lifted to her face, cradling her jaw with devastating gentleness. You're remarkable and terrifying, and I don't know what I did to deserve this second chance at feeling, but you survived. Elena's voice was fierce. You survived 300 years of loss and loneliness, and still chose honor over cruelty. You protected the vulnerable even when it cost you. You built something worth defending. That's what you did to deserve it. Something in his expression cracked completely, all the walls coming down, centuries of carefully maintained control shattering like glass. He looked young suddenly, despite his ageless features. Vulnerable, human. Elena, he whispered. And then his lips found hers. The kiss was cold. Fire, his mouth ice against hers, but the desperation behind it burned. He kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning, like 300 years of not allowing himself to want had condensed into this single moment. Elena's hands found his coat, pulling him closer, and felt him shudder at the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard despite one of them not needing air, Cassian pressed his forehead to hers. The bond, he murmured. I can feel it completing. Everything I locked away is coming back, and it's overwhelming, and you're at the center of it all. And I don't know how to do this, how to feel this much after so long. Then we figure it out together. Elena's hands framed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. You're not alone anymore, Cassian. Neither of us is. The Hound whined softly, pressing against both of them, now a bridge between mortal and vampire, between past grief and present hope. And as the twilight deepened around them, Elena felt the bond lock into place with an almost audible click. She gasped as emotion flooded through her, not her own feelings, but echoes of Cassian's. 3 centuries of loss and loneliness, yes, but also determination, honor, a fierce protective instinct that had kept him fighting when surrender would have been easier. And underneath it all, threading through everything like a river of silver, the growing certainty that she mattered. That this improbable connection was worth defending with everything he had. I feel you, she whispered, awed. Not just the Hound, you. Everything you've carried. And I feel you. Cassian's voice shook. Your courage. Your resilience. The way you keep choosing to stand, even when falling would be easier. Elena, he stopped, seeming overwhelmed. Yours, she finished. If you want me to be. His laugh was shaky, disbelieving. Want? I've wanted from the moment you looked at me and saw someone tired instead of something dangerous. But wanting and deserving are different things. Then it's good I get to choose too. Elena pulled him down for another kiss, softer this time. And I choose this. Choose you. Whatever complications come with it. When they finally returned to Silvermark Manor hours later, dawn was approaching. Cassian retreated to his chambers for daylight rest, but not before catching Elena's hand one last time. We have enemies now, he said quietly. Corvus won't accept this peacefully. There will be more challenges, more threats. Are you certain? I'm certain. Elena squeezed his cold fingers. We face them together. He nodded, something like wonder in his eyes, and vanished into shadow. Elena stood alone in the entrance hall, except not alone. Never alone again, with the Hound at her side and Cassian's emotions humming through the bond. She'd entered this manor as a desperate refugee. Now she was something else entirely. A member of House Silvermark. The anchor of an impossible bond. And perhaps against all odds, the beginning of something that might reshape the careful balance of power the 5 houses had maintained for centuries. Outside, the first rays of sunlight touched the manor's walls, and Elena Thorne, who'd once been invisible, stood in the light and felt seen. Chapter 10. The choice between twilight and dawn. 6 months changed everything. Elena stood in the Silvermark library, watching snow fall beyond the windows. Winter had come to the city, transforming it into something from a fairy tale, white and pristine and deceptively peaceful. But she'd learned that peace in the vampire world was merely the space between conflicts. And this particular peace was growing thin. The monthly council examinations had become routine. Each time, the bond proved stable. Each time, Elena demonstrated no signs of manipulation or coercion. And each time, Lady Serafini's fury grew more palpable. House Corvus was losing patience with political channels. "You're thinking too loudly." Cassian's voice came from the doorway. 6 months had taught Elena to read the subtle changes in his demeanor, the way he moved more fluidly now, as if rediscovering grace he'd forgotten. The way he smiled more easily, though still rarely. The way he looked at her, like she was both miracle and terror. Corvus sent another message. Elena gestured to the letter on the desk. "Demanding I appear before their house to answer questions about irregularities in my sanctuary claim, which you'll ignore. Because you're under no obligation to submit to their authority." Cassian crossed to her. His presence, a familiar cold that Elena had learned to associate with safety. "They're probing for weakness. Testing whether fear might accomplish what politics couldn't. Are they right to be afraid?" Elena turned to face him. "Of what we represent. A mortal bonded to vampire power, breaking centuries of separation between our kinds? Probably." His honesty was stark. "Change is always frightening to those who benefit from stasis. And we are change, Elena, whether we intended to be or not." The bond between them had deepened over months, becoming as natural as breathing. Elena could sense Cassian's emotional states, now not his thoughts, but the currents of feeling he'd reclaimed through their connection. And he could feel hers, the warmth of human emotion that reminded him why existence mattered. But lately, she'd sensed something else too. A growing tension, a question he hadn't asked, but carried like a weight. "Tell me what you're not saying," Elena said quietly. Cassian was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her face as if memorizing it. "You've been here 6 months. In that time, I've watched you transform from a frightened refugee into someone who negotiates with house representatives and studies vampire law like a scholar. You've become essential to Silvermark, not just to me, but to the house itself. The servants respect you. The territory prospers. Even the Hound is calmer, more stable. But you're still mortal." The words came out pained. "I can feel your life through the bond, Elena. The steady rhythm of your heartbeat, the warmth of your blood, the way time moves for you in a way it hasn't moved for me in 3 centuries. And I know I can feel that eventually, that heartbeat will slow. That warmth will fade. And I'll be left with memories again." Elena's chest tightened. They'd avoided this conversation for months, dancing around the inevitable question that hung between them. "You're asking if I want to be turned. I'm asking if you've thought about it." "Because I have, constantly." Cassian's voice dropped. "I've thought about what it would mean to have centuries with you instead of decades. To not count each day like grains of sand slipping away. To know that what we're building together won't end in the blink of an eye by my measure of time. And," Elena's voice was barely audible, "and I'm terrified of asking, because becoming vampire means death before rebirth. It means drinking blood to survive. It means watching the sun become poison and the night become your only world." His hands clenched at his sides. "I remember my own turning. The agony of transformation. The horror of first hunger. The slow realization that I'd never be truly human again. How can I offer you that? How can I ask you to give up your mortality, your warmth, your humanity, even if it means we'd have forever?" Elena reached for his hands, uncurling those clenched fists and threading her fingers through his. "Have you considered that I might choose it anyway?" His sharp inhale was answer enough. "Elena, let me finish." She squeezed his cold hands. 6 months ago, I was dying slowly. Hunger, cold, rejection, it was killing me piece by piece. You gave me sanctuary, yes, but you also gave me purpose. You taught me that survival can be more than just existing. That strength doesn't always mean being invulnerable. Sometimes it means choosing vulnerability for the right reasons. I taught you those things because I was learning them myself." Cassian said roughly. "Through you. Because of you. Then we taught each other." Elena stepped closer. "And now you're asking me to choose between a mortal life, maybe 50 more years if I'm lucky, or an immortal existence at your side." "Cassian, that's not as difficult a choice as you think. You'd give up sunlight?" His voice was anguished. "Warmth? The ability to have children, to age naturally, to what? Grow old alone while you stay frozen in time? Watch my body fail while you remain unchanged? Die? And leave you to 3 more centuries of loneliness?" Elena shook her head. "That's not a future I want either." At least transformation offers the possibility of something more, but the cost, I know the cost. You've been honest about what it means to be vampire. The hunger, the isolation, the weight of immortality, Elena's voice steadied. But I also know what it means to have found something worth keeping. And you are worth keeping, Cassian Silvermark. Even if it means becoming something different to stay with you. Cassian pulled her against him suddenly, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. You don't know what you're saying. The transformation fails sometimes. 1 in 10 doesn't survive the turning. And even if you do, there's no guarantee you'll still want this. Still want me. Becoming vampire changes you in ways that can't be predicted. Then it's a risk we take together. Elena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Like every other risk we've taken. You risked political standing to grant me sanctuary. I risked everything to stay. This is just the next step. When? His voice was raw. Because if we do this, Elena, I need to know you're certain. That you've had time to truly consider. I've had 6 months. I've watched you navigate centuries of politics with grace. I've seen you protect the vulnerable, even when it cost you. I've felt your loneliness through the bond, and your joy when we're together. And the fear that I'll leave you through death instead of choice. Elena's hand found his face, cold skin warming slightly under her touch. I'm certain. The only question is whether you can bear to offer me what you've called a curse. It's not a gift, Cassian whispered. Immortality is beautiful and terrible and I choose it anyway. With you, because of you. Elena's voice was absolute. So, yes, Cassian, yes, to transformation, yes, to whatever comes after, yes, to choosing you over and over for as many centuries as we're given. Something broke in his expression, relief and terror and wonder all at once. There are rituals, preparations. I'd need to ensure the transformation is done properly, with house witnesses to verify consent, and then we do all of it. Elena's smile was fierce. We do it right. We do it together. And then we face whatever Corvus throws at us as equals, not equals. Cassian's thumb brushed across her cheek. Partners. Which is better? The Hound materialized from shadows, pressing against both of them, its presence a reminder of the bond that had started all of this. Elena felt its approval through the connection, felt Cassian's overwhelming emotion threatening to spill over, felt her own certainty settling like foundation stones. When the snow melts, Cassian said finally, Spring, when the city is renewing itself, we'll perform the ritual then, with proper ceremony and house witness. Give you time too to change my mind? Elena raised an eyebrow. I won't, but I appreciate the attempt to be noble about it. His laugh was shaky, disbelieving. You're remarkable. 6 months ago you were a frightened mortal in an alley, and now you're negotiating the terms of your own transformation like you're discussing contract terms. You taught me to negotiate. Elena pulled him down for a kiss that was becoming familiar. Cold lips, desperate warmth, the taste of something both human and other. Among other things, when they broke apart, Cassian pressed his forehead to hers. I'll make you immortal. But Elena, promise me something, anything. Promise you'll tell me if you regret it. Not in a century, not when regret is too late to matter, but in the first years, when the hunger is hardest and the sunlight most missed. Promise you'll be honest, even if that honesty breaks what we're building. I promise. Elena's voice was solemn. And you promise to remember that I chose this. That I'm not a victim of circumstance or a refugee with no options. I could leave the city tomorrow with your blessing and funds to start over. But I'm staying. I'm choosing transformation. I'm choosing you. I promise. His arms tightened around her. Though I still think you're mad, probably. Elena grinned against his shoulder. But you're mad too. We'll be mad together. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white silence. Inside Silvermark Manor, mortal and vampire stood intertwined, making promises that would echo through centuries. The Hound settled at their feet, content in its purpose, and somewhere in the distance, House Corvus plotted and planned, unaware that they'd already lost the war they thought they were winning. Because Elena Thorne had made her choice, not between mortality and immortality, but between loneliness and connection, between safety and significance, between a quiet life fading into obscurity and a dangerous existence that mattered. She chose the vampire, who'd forgotten how to feel, until she reminded him. She chose the bond that shouldn't exist, but did anyway. She chose transformation, knowing it would change everything. And in the spring, when snow melted and the city renewed itself, Elena Thorne would die and be reborn. She would trade mortality for forever, warmth for cold, sunlight for starlight, but she would do it with Cassian's Silvermark at her side. And that made all the difference, because some choices were worth the cost. Some bonds were worth defending. And some love impossible, improbable, immortal love was worth becoming a monster for. Elena had learned that lesson in a dark alley 6 months ago, when she'd touched a creature made of grief, and it had chosen her back. Now she was choosing it again. Choosing him. Choosing this strange, dangerous, beautiful existence where vampires could learn to hope and mortals could learn to be brave. Outside, dawn approached. For now, Elena could still see it, the pink and gold painting the horizon. The promise of another day. Soon enough, she'd watch those colors from the other side of glass. Trapped in eternal night, but she'd watch them with Cassian. And that, Elena decided, was more than enough. It was everything. The end epilogue note. 6 months later. On the first night of spring, Elena Thorne underwent the transformation ritual under the witness of all 5 houses. She survived one of the fortunate 9 and 10 and rose as a vampire of House Silvermark. The bond with the Hound remained intact, stronger than ever, proving that some connections transcend even death and rebirth. And though House Corvus continued to scheme and challenge, they found themselves facing not one ancient vampire lord, but 2 partners who'd learned that the greatest strength isn't invulnerability, it's choosing to be vulnerable for the right reasons. In the centuries that followed, their story became legend. The mortal who became immortal for love, the vampire who learned to feel again, and the bond that changed the rules of what was possible between their kinds. Some endings are just beginnings wearing different faces.